Thank you again for joining us for today's session and of course the Wyxley Council Conference as a whole. The next hour will be focused on writing an effective personal statement, which will be led by Kim from SOAS. Presentation is around 30 minutes in duration or so, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions. We'll be hosting a panel of admissions and student recruitment representatives to take your questions following the presentation. So hopefully we can get through as many of those as possible. We've already had some questions for when you registered for today's session, so we'll go through those. If you do have any more questions, please can you put it in the Q&A box, and we'll get them answered for you too from our various panelists. So without further ado, I'll welcome Kim to present. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and hello everybody again. So I will be taking you through a short presentation around 30 minutes and maybe slightly under that, and we're going to look at what makes an effective personal statement. I'm going to go through a few slides that kind of look at the different areas of a personal statement that a student might want to consider when putting a personal statement together, but the main bulk of this session will be actually going through some examples of that have been taken from real life personal statements, so that you can see some examples of some really good personal statements, but also some more problematic examples that we have. And not to say that in any of those examples that the students didn't get into the university of choice, so there wasn't something later on in their personal statement that helped to showcase how they would be suitable for that program. But as a whole, every part of the personal statement counts. And I think obviously, when we were in the intro sessions, you saw that we're all quite different institutions. And so it is hard for students to think about applying to 5 universities and trying to get a personal statement that hits home with every single one of them. So the main thing that they need to do in going into this is to do as much research as they can on the front end in terms of who they're applying to. But then also how they're writing their personal statement and whether those personal statements will work for the universities they're applying to. So in terms of writing an effective personal statements, the things that your students might want to think about, sorry, I've just accidentally skipped a few ahead. I think my computer's just a little bit slow with its connection, so bear with me 1 minute. Sorry. Apologies for this, everybody. Rory, I might have to ask you to take control back just because my internet connection is a little bit off. So I think we're back onto the first slide. So sorry about that, everybody. But this presentation is going to look at how universities use personal statements, top tips for writing personal statements, how to structure a personal statement, what makes an effective personal statement, and then, as I said, we'll go on to explore examples of strengths and weaknesses in personal statements. So in terms of how universities use personal statements, they use them to learn more about the applicants and why they've applied. They use them to understand an applicant's knowledge and appreciation for the subject, as well as their motivation to pursue it, to add a qualitative context to quantitative results or predictions, to distinguish between students of a similar academic background, for shortlisting and interview purposes or selection days, and as a tool for selecting or rejecting applicants. Top tips for writing personal statements. The first thing I would say is don't worry about structure or size at first. So a lot of students, the main barrier to them in terms of writing a personal statement is they just don't know where to start, and they're so worried about the structure of the personal statement and how many characters they have left, that really getting those first few lines of that personal statement down is really, really difficult and creates a real barrier for them. So what we normally say is don't worry about that too much at first, brainstorm what excites them about the subject, how do they know about the subject already, how have they engaged with the subject so far, really what's kind of brought them to that point where they want to apply for this particular subject. Then they need to thinking about backing up their interests. So do they have any work or volunteer experience that's related to that? What outside reading have they done? What transferable skills do they have that will help them in their studies in that particular subject? And then also they should ask family and friends and teachers about the qualities and strengths that they have that they think would be related to studying those subjects. So many times they might not think of a particular quality or strength that they have that could be really, really important to studying that subject. In terms of top tips of what they shouldn't do is waffle. So try not to include everything and anything. So editing is key, and that's where it brings into the first point is, yes, brainstorm at first, but then think about what is essential for the personal statement. Showing off, there's a very thin line between backing up your interest with relevant examples, and being confident can come across as good in some ways, but also can come across false and boastful in others. They shouldn't mention any one university or tailor the personal statement to any one university because that will possibly alienate the other universities that they're applying to. But again, this should be something that within the kind of research that they've done in the institutions they're applying to, that there should be some commonalities and some common themes throughout the universities they're applying to. So for instance, if they're applying to a law school, are they applying to black letter law schools, or are they applying to critical thinking law schools? Do the law schools they're applying to all have a background in human rights law, and that's why they've applied to them? So if they write about those subject areas and those kind of topics, they're tailoring it to the group of universities as opposed to one. They shouldn't use too flowery language, so they need to be clear and concise because they do have a word limit and a character limit that they're working to. And copying, they shouldn't copy from the internet or articles or books or from peers. And I think that's a really, really important one to think about, particularly from the international point of view, in that in many ways, how you cite different websites or books can be very different in different countries, and so what one considers copying somebody else might not, but they need to be very aware of that when they're writing their personal statements. And never submit a first draft. You need to review, revise, and ask others about your personal statement. So if we go on to the next slide. So how to structure a personal statement. So in terms of structuring a personal statement, you should, one, make a statement. So have a strong opening paragraph that sets the scene, that grabs the reader's attention. Why are they excited about the course? What do they understand about the course, and how can they showcase that understanding? Then they need to think about evidence. So proving their suitability, their academic skills, their transferable skills, and their engagement with that subject area. And again, I would say on this one that evidence-wise, a lot of students think that, okay, that means I need to have done a lot of work experience in a particular area. And so I need to find out how I can get work experience with a particular company, how I can get into a particular role. And that's not always the same for different universities. So again, by researching the different universities, they can see what engagement actually means. So if I'm talking about SOAS, for example, and I'm talking about politics, I don't necessarily need that student to have done some sort of work experience on some sort of political campaign, on some sort of local election. But I do need to know how they've engaged with politics. So where do they follow politics? What resources do they use? What do they understand about election processes? What do they understand about different media sources and how they might be bias towards one party or to another. So that's what I'm really looking for in terms of SOAS. So again, it should be different for different students, and having just done some work experience in itself isn't enough. They need to say how that work experience has really shaped them moving forward and how it will make them suitable for a program. And then put the personal in personal statement. So finish with what makes them an interesting candidate for universities. And what makes them interested in a particular subject area? How did they first hear about it? How did they first engage with it? Is it through a personal experience? Is it through a personal life experience that they've had? Or is it just something they've read through their studies? So really just kind of working out how they fit into that part of the scenario, and looking at that both in terms of their academic program, they're both in terms of their time at university, but also what that means beyond university. So do they have some thought process about what they want to do in the future, their career aspirations? We as universities know that career aspiration may change throughout the time that they're with us and also the time they finish, but it helps us to kind of really understand what their thought process is going in, and also how much they understand about a particular subject area. We go on to the next slide. So again, in terms of what makes an effective personal statement, we've broken it down into some key areas for you here. So one of the first things to look at is enthusiasm, passion, and motivation for the subject. And I think this was mentioned before in the university introductions, and it's very, very true that this is what we're looking for. Then we need to understand their understanding and experience of the subject. So how have they engaged with it so far? What do they think studying a particular subject is? You'll be surprised at how many students I've spoken to about lots of different subject areas. And I'll speak to them about a particular subject area at SOAS and realize that maybe what they want to study is very different from what we're offering. So this then goes back to whether they've thought about the universities they're applying to and whether they really know about the subject that they want to do. Then next, let's look at the academic engagement with the subject. So again, how academically have they engaged in this particular subject, or what in their previous academic background will help them to study this particular subject? Not every subject that you'll study at university is available in a kind of a high school or a secondary school environment, but there are areas that are more related or less related than others. Then having relevant knowledge and skill sets. So again, this can include things like any work experience, any volunteer experience. It can be whether they've done any extracurriculars or supercurriculars that are again related to their particular subject. It should be an honest self-portrait. So we want to know about the student. We can see a lot of things from the application itself. We can see students' grades. We can see what schools they've been to. We can see what academic programs they've undertaken. This is really a chance to get to know them in a real sense. Next would be originality and independence of thought. So when we look at originality and independence of thought, we're looking at, so they've read lots of articles, they've read around different areas. Do they actually understand how they can apply that knowledge? Do they have a critical eye to that knowledge? And are they looking to expand on that subject area, and what are they looking to really be able to bring to a particular subject? And then we're looking at academic focus of around 75 to 80%, depending on which university you're applying to. Some would like more academic focus than others. So again, that's part of that research that the student is doing in who they're applying to and how they should structure their personal statement for the universities that they're applying to. All of them if possible. And then lastly, we're looking for a good structure with a clear, well thought out and persuasive approach. So I'm going to go on to some examples here of good and bad personal statements. We'll start with all the good because it's always a good place to start. So I've gone through them by the various different areas that we looked at. So this first example is for enthusiasm and motivation. So again, looking at why this particular subject and what aspects specifically are of interest. And if you look at this personal statement, or this extract from a personal statement that we've put here, this student has a specific example of an issue within politics that first showed them the power and the importance of politics and really kind of garnered their interest. And they go on to say which areas of politics they would want to tackle. So they're looking at civil rights, they're looking at the distribution of power, they're looking at the influence of religion and ideology in politics. So it really goes to show the student there is something that's kind of lit a flame in them in terms of what they want to study. And they've also thought about areas within politics that they then want to go on to study, both included in this example, but outside of this example as well. If we go on to the next example. So in terms of this one, again, enthusiasm and motivation, the student goes on to say how, again, a particular experience that they've had or area that they've seen has really impacted them, and why they want to lead to change after this. So they've really talked about how they have seen this play out in front of them and want to tackle it within the areas of kind of protest, particular in terms of student protest. In terms of this next example of enthusiasm and motivation as well, we go on to see that this student has a very strong opening statement. They've listed a particular law within the country in which they're from, which has prompted their interest in law. They're able to showcase an understanding of how law can be both impacted by kind of areas of religion and culture and anthropology, but also how laws can impact that as well. So how those are interlinked. And they go on to talk about how they would like to use law as a catalyst for changing community views in the future. And I think this personal statement would be an effective personal statement for both a Black letter law school and also a critical thinking law school, as the student is already showcasing how they see that you can't study one area independently of another. So again, with enthusiasm and motivation, this student has talked about economics, and they've talked about how they themselves have been impacted by economics and how they can see that economics affects lots of different areas within their own lives. So they've looked at how economic sanctions can have an effect, as they are from a country that has economic sanctions. They've looked at high unemployment, they've looked at financial instability, and they've looked at drastic inflation. So they're showcasing the relevance of economics in the everyday world, and they go on to say how they plan to use economics within their career. We go on to the next example. So in this one, we're moving on to understanding and experience. So these are looking at what are the key issues and what studying this subject would involve. And with this example of social anthropology, this actual example was for a social anthropology course in one university, and then a social sciences course in a number of other universities. So what I think is important here is the student talks about why they want to study social sciences. And they've said what they think that includes. But then they've also talked about how they originally were interested in politics. And then the more they read about politics and the more they followed various different elections, that led them on to looking at engaging with Marxism, which then led them on to looking at engaging with philosophy. And then as they've gone through that, they've then engaged with social theory, and they've looked at lots of different reading around that. And then it finally brings you back round to why they then want to study social sciences. So I think it's interesting that this student's actually taken you on a journey, going through lots of interdisciplinary study, but how they then come back to their end choice of social anthropology. And I think that's really helpful for universities to kind of gauge why they might be interested in this program, but also why they might have been interested in other programs if they've applied to Arrange. Go on to the next example. So again, this one for understanding and experience, this student is talking about why they want to study Arabic. And again, it includes partly a personal experience of going to Bahrain, but it includes how they so far have engaged with the study of Arabic, and how they found particularly that there are a lot of misinterpretations from what they've read so far, and a very particular lens to what they've seen. And that's why they want to really understand Arabic from a completely different standpoint. And they really want to see how you can see Arabic and the study of Arabic and Islam outside of this kind of Western lens. In terms of this next example for business and management, obviously we've taken out the exact roles that they did, because obviously it would probably give away a particular student's personal statement. It talks about a range of different experiences they've had in different businesses that have really led them to be interested in business management. And so how they've gained a better understanding with each of the experiences they've had, and how that's brought them to that final decision to study business management and to be invested in it. What I would say with this particular example is, and they did do it later on in the personal statement, so we're just including extracts here, but they could have chosen to focus on maybe just one of the examples and talked about it in greater detail, and maybe how that is the main focus for them moving on. So then for the next example, we're going to look at academic engagement, so demonstrating academic writing skills, and then analysis and evaluation, and looking for applicants who go beyond the classroom. So with this first example, the student has written an essay for the Royal Economic Society competition, and that they've looked at a particular area within economics that they've kind of focused on, and why they've wanted to focus in on that. So again, it shows that outside of what they're needing to do for their classroom assessments, they're already writing academically for outside competitions, and really focusing in on kind of key areas. And then with the second example for law, again, they show how outside of the classroom environment, they're engaging with lots of different reading. They're reading academic writing, they're reading law reports, they're looking at judgments from the Supreme Court, and they're kind of really trying to expand their engagement, as well as enjoying reading kind of political and economic theory, which again means that they're understanding that they won't be learning law as a silo and as an independent subject. Again, the only thing I would say with this one is they could have focused in on one of two of those examples and kind of given a little bit more detail into how that really has helped to prepare them. So in terms of the next two, these are academic engagement, and one is for earth sciences and engineering, and the second one is for computer engineering. And with that, again, the first one, again, has a personal aspect to it. So the experience of witnessing landslides has led them to want to look at particular areas within energy production and consumption, and they've written an article for the National Geographic competition, and they've stated the particular areas within that article that they want to pursue further. And then in the second example, they've talked at how their passion for maths, so they've talked about lots of different areas of maths, and also programming has helped to prepare them for their university study. And particularly if you're going to an institution that is looking for a particular background or focus within a student, this will really help to set you apart from others. So then again, in terms of academic engagement, the student for BA in International Relations has talked about how they have grown up with an interest in kind of geopolitics and international relations, kind of what areas within that have fascinated them. And then they've talked about how they included that in their EPQ. So again, that's something really important to think about, how you can look at the academics you're already doing and include that into your university applications. So then we go on relevant knowledge and skills, and demonstrating through examples of classroom-based study or super and extracurricular activities and at work experience, how you've engaged with particular subjects. So for instance, this student here for actuarial science, you can't take actuarial science when you're in high school or secondary school, as we would deem it in the UK. And so this student has looked at, okay, I want to study this. I'm going to look at if I can take a taster course in it or a summer course in it, and then kind of gain more of an understanding. So by doing that, that makes him a really interesting candidate for those universities who offer this particular program. So I think that that again shows a proactive nature on behalf of the student, that they've gone out and they found a taster program that would really work for them. And then they've been able to talk about particular areas within that taster program that they really found interesting. So again, it shows that not only are they just doing it from a perspective of being able to put that down in a personal statement, but they're really, really engaged with that particular taster program they've done. Okay, then for this next example in comparative literature, this student talks about their current experience in live theatre, in English literature, and in drama and theatre studies, and how that's really helped to shape them in terms of what they want to study moving forward. They understand the difference in being a performer, a practitioner, and a spectator, and they really have looked at different ways to engage with theatre throughout their existing studies and also in their spare time. And I think actually I should point out with this particular example that the student then later goes on to talk about how they would use that more kind of practical experience in terms of studying comparative literature from a more kind of theory or analytical or critical basis. And then in terms of the next two examples, again, these are relevant knowledge and skill sets. So one student has talked about their previous studies in history and how this has helped them to develop critical thinking skills, reasoning skills, how that will actually help them in their studies of international relations and politics. So again, they're showcasing how various different other subjects will still impact the subject that they're moving on to in their studies. And I think that's really important. And thinking creatively when they're going on to study political affairs and the international community from what has happened previously and how that can be used to kind of look at the further study of different countries, different relationships, different political issues. And then in terms of medicine, this particular student has talked about their work experience in renal medicine and how they acquired a wider appreciation for what a typical day would look like, from meeting in a doctor's office to subsequent rounds, and the importance of things like teamwork. Now, I would say that this student again goes on to talk about this in more detail in their personal statement, and that's really important. But one thing I do find that many students, and I don't deal with medicine applications anymore, obviously being at SOAS, but I did used to deal with medicine applications in my previous institution. And one of many things that students don't do is don't always tell you about how they've got that work experience and how they've been able to get that. And that is something that's equally as important as the work experience itself. So, you know, we as universities want to know how they've engaged in those particular areas. Okay, and then looking at this politics and philosophy student, again, they've talked about the Model UN club that they were in within high school. They've talked about their understanding of how the UN plays such a pivotal role. And they've also talked about how they were selected for the Deputy Secretary General at the conference and their school organisation, and how that has helped them to grow a lot of strengths and skill sets to move forward. So again, showing that this student is going above and beyond what they need to in their day-to-day academic life. So again, this one is for the originality and independence in thought. And I think what was interesting with this student is they reference a number of different readings that they've already done, but how they almost have contrasting thoughts to them, and how they see that maybe some of the writings lack an awareness of different issues. So again, this student is showing that they've read around, but also showing that they have the confidence to question what they've read and to see that there are other areas that need to be expanded on, that may well have been expanded on, they just haven't read them yet, but that shows that they want to engage more at that point. And then this particular student for pharmacy, this actually shows that, I mean, actually this student's personal statement could hit or meet a number of the different criteria that we've already looked at. But what I wanted to focus on here was that in this particular example, they've seen one aspect or one area of treatment, but they're also now thinking, okay, well, I've seen how that can affect different things. Maybe this can be something that can be carried through to another area and to another area. So they're starting to see the building blocks of how different areas of pharmacy, different areas of medical treatments, different areas of research can impact each other. And then we're going to go through a few more problematic examples for you here. So the first one is I have been fascinated by the idea of becoming a lawyer ever since I watched the TV drama Suits. And I could actually tell you, you could replace the TV drama Suits with many other dramas. And I've seen this in quite a few personal statements. And so again, this shows that this applicant, you know, hasn't really talked about what in watching this drama Suits actually made them interested in law. So, you know, things can be very different in terms of drama to what it actually looks like in being a lawyer. And if they had gone on to talk about why they thought that that kind of drove an interest in them, it could be something worthwhile that universities want to look at, but this statement in itself doesn't. So for example, I had another statement like this that was about the TV show Luther, but that one they actually talked about looking at the way in which police investigate something and the way in which the legal process works. And even though they knew it was a dramatized show, they were able to pull from it things that they particularly wanted to look at. So I think that that's where these kind of examples, that could be one good way of putting in that watching a show actually made them want to become a lawyer, whereas this one is a very much a standalone statement. Yep, so for this next example, this one, the student actually went through quite a long description of why they want to study politics. And this one, they used about 3 or 4 sentences to kind of take you on a narrative, but it was really lengthy and it didn't really showcase exactly what they wanted to study within politics, apart from in the very last sentence, but it took you a long time to get there. So again, I'm just thinking the student could have told you this in a much shorter space and in much shorter character count, which leaves them more to go on to within their personal statement. And then this example for medicine, so this one just shows where, again, they've listed all this different work experience that they've had, but they haven't listed any real examples of what they gleaned from that work experience itself. So how did that help them within their studies? And what did they do within this work experience? Because if you look at a lot of the areas that they've covered in this, it would be hard to see how a student had actually interacted within those kind of work experience. So it's not so much about listing everything that you've been able to engage with, so much as it is about talking about what skill sets you've been able to get from that. And then this second example for history is all information that could be gleaned from the application itself. So they're telling you what they're currently studying and at what levels, and then just basically say it provides them with a solid background for their university study. But we would have been able to see all of that from their application, and we would probably have reached the same conclusion that it matches with what they want to study. So again, it's really about kind of talking in detail. This next one, oh, sorry. Yeah, so we go one slide on from this one. So this next one, in terms of history, talks about how the student was the captain of the football team. And though he does talk about how this taught him the importance of working together as part of a team and prioritize time between their studies and their football practice, I don't think it went into deep enough into linking the history program and the role as a captain of a football team. So in everything they mention, they just have to keep linking it back to that particular area of study. And then for this particular student, this student is looking at studying film. They talk about their involvement with the Film Society, which is very relevant. They talk about their interest in football and tennis teams. And then they spend a lot of time talking about how sports is a big part of their life. And then they go on to talk about a number of tennis players that they are really, really passionate about, and in particular, their all-time idol. Now, that doesn't have a lot of relevance to their study of film. If they said that they were planning to do a documentary film about tennis, then that would have made sense and it would have linked it back. But what they've written here, it really doesn't have any strong correlation to that particular area of study. So it's something that we really didn't need to see in their personal statement. So again, just to recap on what makes an effective personal statement, we're looking at enthusiasm, passion, and motivation for the subject. We're looking at an understanding and experience of the subject. We're looking at academic engagement with the subject, relevant knowledge and skill sets, an honest self-portrait, originality and independence of thought, an academic focus of 75 to 80%, and a good structure with a clear, thought out and persuasive approach. So we hope this session has been insightful and the examples help to showcase what universities are looking for, and we welcome further discussion on personal statements in the panel session.
Awesome, thank you so much, Kim. Please, can I invite all the panelists to join us on camera so we can begin. There we go. I think it's everyone joining us. Okay. So please, can we just begin with a round of introductions? Of course, we've had Kim, but for anyone who's joining us, please can we start with Will, and we'll just go around and introduce ourselves. Thanks.
Thank you, Rory. Yes, my name is Will Berea Hall. I work at LSE, as you can probably tell from the background. I'm the Student Recruitment and Study Abroad Manager.
Lovely. Jake?
Morning, my name's Jake. I'm the Head of Undergraduate Admissions here at King's.
Panayota?
Hi, thank you, Rory, and Penny for short. So I'm Head of UK and European Student Recruitment at UCL.
And finally, Mark?
Hi there, I'm Mark. I'm the Faculty Admissions Manager for Medicine at Imperial College.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us for the panel session of this Writing Your Effective Personal Statement session. And thank you to everyone who has submitted a question so far. And I'd just like to remind everyone to please use the Q&A window on Zoom to ask your questions. We've also received some in advance for when you registered. So I would think I'll begin with a few of those. So a common theme I noticed in the questions was how much weight does the personal statement carry between each institution? I'm sure different courses may put more weight or emphasis on the personal statement as well within your institution. So maybe could you just briefly touch on that? And potentially we could start with Jake, just the different weight, maybe some different courses within the institution put on the personal statement.
Of course, as you say, different courses have different weightings to it. So, and that's broadly based on how competitive the course is. For our not very competitive courses, very little weight is going to be given to the personal statement. We'll do a very much a binary score. One, is it relevant? Is it speaking about the course in question? Those sort of things. And it's either a 1 or a 0. A poor personal statement there wouldn't necessarily be a barrier to an offer, but just means it's far less likely. For our more competitive courses, we use it very much as it's actually a very key factor in deciding who does and doesn't get a place in some ways. We have so many people who apply, often very similar sort of grade profiles and things, that we have very few strings to our bow to kind of really nuance who we're going to offer to. So the personal statement carries quite a lot of weight. I'm tentative to give it a percentage, but it is quite strong, quite a lot of weight there. One thing I would say is the personal statement would never balance out poor performance or average performance in grades. You have to have those exceptional grades and the exceptional personal statement too often to get an offer for those competitive courses. I think that's it in a nutshell for Kings.
Penny, would you like to jump in from UCL?
Yeah, I think Jake covered it really well, actually. Very similar position at UCL. When you do have very competitive programs and you need to differentiate the best possible students for the program, the personal statement can be very important. Again, we wouldn't tend to give percentage of weightage, but it can play an important factor for some of our most competitive programs.
And Mark, would you have a
different
viewpoint on that?
Similarly, it would vary from course to course. Some courses, such as medicine, the personal statement actually has very little impact and as part of our selection process, but it may be referred to during the interview. So it's very important that you can back up whatever you put in your personal statement, but for medicine, it doesn't specifically, it's not a specific part of our selection process. But then other courses that don't interview, it's far more important, obviously.
And Will, Kim, anything further to add?
Nothing to contradict my colleagues. I think sometimes it's helpful for advisors to understand the application process as something of a hurdle race. And when a selector is looking at an application, just as Jake said, they need to see that every component is met, is strong. So the academic background, the grades, the predicted grades, the teacher reference, and then maybe the final hurdle is the personal statement. So a decision might ultimately be made on the personal statement, and therefore it does carry great weight. Certainly at LSE, it is a very important part of any strong application. But if your application doesn't meet our requirements before that, you don't get to the personal statement stage. So everything, very holistic approach that we adopt, but the personal statement is an important part.
And you, Kim?
Yeah, I'd also say that, it's come into play a lot in the last 2 years with COVID, that also the personal statement can be a place where students, again, add some context to their studies. So I know in particular with students obviously having experienced a lot of difficulties in taking exams and in terms of their school being disrupted in the last 2 years with COVID, a number of students used at a small part, not all of their personal statement to address that. And I think that can be helpful because sometimes what we see in a UCAS application does kind of fit a particular structure. So where there needs to be a further explanation, the personal statement can allow a student to do that.
Great, thank you very much, guys. And then another common theme to the questions we've had is regarding extracurricular activities. And I know you touched on it in the presentation, Kim, but in terms of structure and personal statements, could you guys further explain maybe how much focus should be on academics, whether it's the majority of the personal statement, and also how much then should be focused on relevant extracurriculars? Again, we can go in the same order again if that's easiest. Jake, can we come back to you on that one?
Sure. I think the presentation covered this almost perfectly for us. So the 75 to 80% for the academic side of things was really good indicator there. Extracurriculars should certainly be involved as long as they're relevant. That's kind of, I guess, it from King's point of view on that side of things.
Yeah, again, I think the presentation, Kim covered it really well, and Jake just reiterated that, 75% on the academic focus. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, guys. That seems to be a common theme. And just as some question to that, really, if a student has other hobbies that may not necessarily be relevant to the course, would you recommend they include that just to showcase what other interests that they have? It would be good if you could, hear your opinions on that as well. Will, would you like to jump in there?
Yeah, well, I think that when we talk about 20-25% of the personal statement not necessarily being directly related to the content of the program they're applying for, or their suitability for it, that is where that information can go, that sort of contextual information that fleshes out our understanding of the applicant. But it is clearly, if it's just 20-25%, the minority of what is being delivered. And depending on the competitiveness of the program, as we've all alluded to, if you're applying for a very competitive program, you're needing to demonstrate your fit, your compatibility with it. So the more you focus on those relevant skills and experiences, the stronger you're likely to be as an applicant. So no harm in putting it in, but very much the minority. And for a competitive program, really focus on the fit, the compatibility with the program.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else like to add on that before we move on?
Yeah, and I would add that even extracurriculars should be linked back to what they study. So, you know, we do see that extracurriculars can have an impact in a lot of transferable skills that students will learn. But it's important for them to keep drawing that line back to, again, you know, I have this experience, but how will it help me? And how will it make me the best candidate for this particular program?
Awesome, thank you. Another question that's come through during the registration phase was the structure of admissions departments in our relevant institutions. And I know we're focusing on the personal statement, but that also leads to that element. And the question really revolves about, are the admissions teams central or more faculty based, and who ultimately reads the personal statement? And then following on from that, if there are any borderline applicants, would the personal statement be sent to faculty, for example, for further assessment? Some insight on that would be great. So Jake, could we begin with you again, please?
Of course, here at King's, we're completely centralized. So if you have a standard application, everything goes perfectly fine, and normally everything will go through our admissions office. That means that your personal statements can be read by a lay person, so not necessarily an expert. They'll have a good sense, and often we'll have rubrics supplied by a faculty, but often some of the minutiae of the subjects aren't necessarily known by the individuals who are assessing. As you said, borderline cases, or where we might need a second viewing, or someone just with a bit more knowledge on the course to have a look, often they'll get sent to the tutor. I would say, though, 95% or more of our applicants never see an academic tutor or don't go through to the faculty.
At UCL, we have mainly central admissions teams, so exceptions with the Bartlett and law, where it's dealt with directly by the faculties, but we do have experts in those particular areas, so assigned to particular faculties who would be viewing and assessing the personal statements, and then if needed would be referred perhaps to an academic department, but in most cases we have academic experts in the subject areas within our admissions teams who will be considering those applications.
And Mark?
Yeah, so Imperial, it's slightly different. We have a sort of part devolved admissions, whereby we have a central admissions team that do the initial basic sort of assessment, that the grades are grade requirements, predicted grades are sufficient, that sort of thing. Then all the applications are then sent through to the faculty, who then make the final decisions. And then they will pass those decisions back to the central admissions, then we will do the processing.
Good to know. And Will?
LSE, we have a team of central selectors, professional selectors, and so the applications are not sent to the academic departments, but the central selectors work hand in glove with those academic departments, who of course set what we're looking for in terms of entry requirements. And if there were a particularly unusual case or a difficult case, that may well be taken to the department for a final decision. But given the volume of applications that we're all receiving, these central selectors very quickly do become experts in their fields. So rest assured, they know what they're looking for.
Thank you.
Yeah, very much the same as Will. So we have a team who are kind of focused on looking at that, who get guidance from all the academic departments. And then if there is, again, a particular case that we think needs to go up to departments, we will refer it to them. And then we have a number of people within the academic departments who can also look at that. I would say the one exception to that would be our law school. So our law school do tend to focus in on looking at the personal statements. That, again, is due to the competitive nature of the law programs, but also because we are looking to have as much representation in terms of our law programs as possible. So we just want to have a bit more of an insight into who the students are and why they would like to come to us.
Thank you. And another question's come through regarding applying for multiple courses at the same institution. I think that's something that we find is quite common, but also can present its own challenges as well. How would you recommend counsellors, in terms of the advice they give to their students in terms of applying for multiple courses at the same university, in terms of getting over the challenges, because ultimately they only get to write one personal statement but can apply for multiple courses. So could you just advise on the challenges around that? And again, we'll come back to you, Jake.
Sure. I guess we'd advise to try and focus the courses you apply for to help focus your personal statement. But where you can't do that, often for non-competitive courses, we give individuals the opportunity to supply a second personal statement separately. However, that is not guaranteed, and that's only for certain course areas and things as well. Otherwise, there are certain key examples where this happens as the norm. So medicine, you have 4 choices, and then you have, I believe it's 4. A colleague may need to correct me. And then you have your 5th choice, which often isn't medicine. There's sort of an understanding and expectation there that your personal statement won't be relevant or as relevant to that 5th area. For those where you're maybe picking kind of separate courses, I'd say try and keep it as focused as you can, with an understanding they might be a bit broad. But generally we try and avoid it, I guess, would be my answer to that one now.
Yeah, I think Jake's covered that very well. Again, we're looking for academic focus and motivation, but so trying to apply for too broad a range of subjects can make it very challenging to try and demonstrate that in one personal statement. So we would be encouraging students to really focus on what they want to study and that the commonalities of the programs they're applying to, and to pull that out in the personal statement.
Is that similar story at Imperial, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for applicants to have a real focus on the area that they want to apply for. I mean, specifically, Jake was right. Medicine is limited to 4 choices, and then you have the 5th non-medicine course. Specifically at Imperial, medical biosciences, which is quite a common 5th choice. Our medical biosciences admissions tutor will not accept or will not consider people that have applied for medicine, simply because he has so many applicants that genuinely want to come to his course, as opposed to a sort of fallback if they don't get any medicine places, that he can afford to just sort of dismiss those out of hand. So I would advise people not to, or to check certainly with their 5th choice course before just putting it on the UCAS form, because it may not, it may just be a wasted choice.
Yeah. Well,
from the LSE perspective, to the audience today, please advise your students not to apply for different courses. Apply for the same general type of course, at least similar fields. That really is very important. Our selectors are looking for any applicant to demonstrate that they are a good fit with their chosen program. And if you're applying for different programs, either within one institution or across the 5 institutions, that inevitably dilutes the personal statement. If an applicant is applying for slightly different courses, then the applicant should focus on the areas of overlap, not the areas of difference. So don't talk about anything in the personal statement that isn't actually taught in the degree that they're applying for.
Yeah, I'd say we actually get this a lot at SOAS, albeit I would say in the programs that are not competitive, say our law program. So quite often I'll see an application come through on UCAS with 5 choices all at SOAS. And sometimes those 5 choices will all be in the same department. And so I always go back to students, and I always go back to counsellors. And in some respects, they kind of question me, because they're saying, well, you're almost saying that I should apply to other universities and not to SOAS. And that is kind of what I'm saying to them. I'm saying that if you want an English literature program at SOAS, by all means apply for an English literature program at SOAS, but don't apply for 5 English literature programs at SOAS that maybe are joint honours with different other programs, because you think that's going to get you more chances of getting into the program. Just because you used all 5 choices doesn't mean that's suddenly going to make me think you really want SOAS, therefore I'm going to give it to you. It would be wiser that you research a range of different institutions, and if you are going to more of an aspirational choice in one of your choices, that you balance that out with the more kind of realistic choice and maybe a fallback option within your 5 choices. So I'm really honest with students about how they approach that. The other way that they can approach that is maybe to look at one of our joint honours programs. So maybe they do have, you know, a real interest in 2 areas, in which case, rather than applying to 2 separate degrees, why don't they just apply to a joint honours degree? So that's the kind of advice that I normally give to students. Obviously, every now and again, there is a particular subject area that at SOAS they're interested in and nobody else teaches it, so therefore they're applying to 4 other choices of programs, other universities. In that case, we will accept an alternative personal statement, or they can submit a personal statement that meets our program and see with those other institutions if they're willing to accept a separate one.
Great stuff, thank you. And then a question which has come up, I guess, potentially off the back of the introductions to the university presentations, is that we're very much research intensive universities. It underpins a lot about teaching. So when applying to one of our institutions, would a focus on the personal statement on any opportunities students have had to undertake research or participate in it through EPQ or extended projects? Would you feel in general that would be quite good advice to follow or to focus on during a personal statement? Jake, could we come back to you on that?
I think yes. In short, I think Will has had the really good, he's good phrasing here of we were looking for the fit, and often as a research institution, those who want to participate in research or engage with kind of our ethos and what we do as an institution definitely would say would fit really well. Yeah, so I think yes, I think it's a good thing to do.
And similar response from all the other institutions, I guess. Yeah, lots of nodding heads, and then yeah, that sounds good to me. I'll head to the next question. Bear with me. And there's again, and there's questions regarding again the EPQ qualification, and again, is it recognized at your institution? And again, there's area of focus that students should include in their personal statement regarding that qualification, or would that be more for the qualification section as well? So again, Jake, can we come back to you on that one?
So in the personal statement, fantastic to reference it. We don't, however, consider it alongside your A levels or as part of the entry requirements either. Often EPQ is for schools that have the capacity to do so and isn't available everywhere. So to kind of keep a level of balance there, we often don't really consider it. I guess the only rare example might be if we were to go to our academic tutor or a truly borderline individual, we may say this is another qualification or an area which could help boost a course, an application. But generally speaking, the EPQ doesn't carry any extra particular weight here at King's.
Penny?
Again, a very similar position to King's, so nothing further to add there.
Is that similar again with you, Mark? And
yeah, very similar. I mean, you know, it's you know, if it's relevant, then it's you know, it's worth mentioning, but it doesn't form, you know, any specific part of our selection or offer making.
I'm going to dissent very much from that. I think any applicant, when they're writing their personal statement, they need to step back, reread that personal statement and think to themselves, does what I'm saying here demonstrate how I am a better student of this subject than someone else? If the EPQ or anything else they're including does that, fantastic, leave it in. If the EPQ or something else doesn't do that, then either take it out or really minimize it. But they've got to be a better applicant than all those other very equally and strongly qualified applicants that we're considering.
And finally, Kim.
Yeah, I think it's just the relevance of it. You know, is what they did in the EPQ related to that particular subject? I mean, they could have done it and it was related to another subject, in which case it wouldn't be so vital. So just again, thinking about how everything kind of knits together.
Perfect. Okay, and that brings us to time for today's session. Thank you very much for the panelists for joining us today. And thank you again, Kim, for your presentation with some real world examples. I'm sure it was very useful for the councillors on the call today. And thank you to all the councillors who've joined as well. The conference continues, so hopefully we see you again online for the rest of the sessions today. So thank you and goodbye.